Can finally divorce you. I'll get half of that juicy estate, all right?
My husband confronted me with divorce right after Dad died. He definitely made a lot of moves and planned things pretty carefully before Dad's passing, and he had a look of triumph on his face.
I put up with your disgusting food all this time, so I think I deserve a good deal of the money. Just get the hell out of here and divorce me. I'll send the documents in the mail later on.
But we're already divorced, honey. When I told him this truth, his triumphant look instantly vanished and was replaced with a pale expression of panic. As if to push him into a corner, I told him another certain truth. This is the story of how my husband, a kind, loving man once upon a time, took advantage of my merciful personality and ultimately paid a handsome price for his betrayal. My name is Hillary Wu, and I'm a 29-year-old employee in sales at a branch office of a large cosmetics company. I married my husband, Rick, who's a year older than me, 3 years ago. We met on a blind group date, a mixer, basically, which was arranged by one of my colleagues at work, and I originally just went to make up for the needed number of girls in the party. Rick sat across the table from me, and he was also a part of the mixer to fill in for someone else who couldn't go. Naturally, we got to talking. Rick seemed cool-hearted and serious at first glance, but when we talked, he had a cute, mischievous side, and I was the one who asked him for his contact information first. After that, we went on several dates and became a couple. After 3 years of dating, we got married. We didn't have any children for a while after we married, but we always talked about how it would be nice to have children someday. However, 2 years into our marriage, when we were both unable to have children, I went to the hospital for an examination to see if everything was okay with me. And that's when I learned of a shocking reality. I was infertile. My OBGYN told me that my chances of conceiving a child were almost zero. I was even told that giving up would be the best option. I was so shell-shocked by this reality that I couldn't recover from the shock for quite a long time. But my husband accepted me for who I was.
Don't worry about it, honey. I wanted to marry you, Hillary Wu. I didn't get married because I wanted children.
But I'm really sorry.
You apologize again? I'll slap you across your wrist. I assure you, I really don't mind at all. You just don't mind about it either, okay?
He smiled as he consoled me. I was depressed for perhaps 3 months. But Rick's encouragement helped me to gradually regain my usual energy and attitude. Nothing had changed since then. Except for one thing, and even that had changed just a little. The truth was that Rick started working overtime more often. He used to come home on time most days, shortly after 5:30 in the evening. But 3 times a week, he started working overtime and came home after 11 p.m. 2 years later, I found out that he had been cheating on me. When his cell phone rang one day, I snuck a peek at the screen and saw a woman's name written on it. When I asked my husband about it, he pretended not to know. But he had a habit of grinding his teeth together when he lied. When I questioned him further, prying him for the truth, he eventually admitted that he had been cheating on me. I became sure he lied about working overtime to meet this woman.
I won't do it again, I swear on my love for you, Hillary. It'll never happen again. I'm so sorry.
You really think an apology is gonna undo all of the hurt you caused me?
I swear on my life, I'll never do it again. Please believe me. Give me another chance.
How can I forgive someone who betrayed me once already? What you ask is impossible. I couldn't forgive my husband. When he cheated on me during this time, I found myself unable to trust him at all anymore. No matter what he said to me, I only saw him as a traitor. I didn't want to talk to him anymore, and the conversation as husband and wife dwindled away into non-existence. He continued apologizing to me for a whole week after I found out about the affair, but I never forgave him. After a month of living in this manner, he confronted me with divorce documents.
I can't continue to live like this. We can't be married like this. This is not the life we envisioned we'd have. I want a divorce, please.
When I looked at the divorce papers, I saw that Rick had already filled his column out. I didn't give an answer right then and there and told him I needed some time to think about it. I thought it was convenient for me to think about it the moment the divorce documents were presented to me, even though I was the one who had pretty much thrown him out of my life. But I wanted to take some time to really think about him and about us. I took some time one day to calm down and think about it, and I realized that my husband had stayed with me even though he knew I couldn't conceive any children. I thought that if I divorced him after just one affair, it would only be a betrayal of a man who had forgiven me once before for something that was already a deal breaker. I thought that to divorce him over a single affair would be to betray him when he had given me another chance at a nice life together without children. I asked myself whether it was the right decision to separate from Rick, who'd undoubtedly gone through quite a thinking session himself when he found out I couldn't bear his children. And as a result, I decided that if I could actually build a relationship with him again, I wanted to do it all over again. I'm sorry, Rick. I took some time, but I thought it over and I decided I don't want a divorce.
You've been acting so cold and so unforgiving like this for a long time, Hillary. My patience is gone.
I'm sorry. You accepted my infertility, and that must have been quite hard to do. I can't just cut you out of my life over a single small affair. You accepted me with a kind heart, and I was so narrow-minded. I forgive you, honey. I'm very sorry about these last few weeks.
Well then, I guess all that's left to say is, let's try our darndest to make each other happy, yeah? And now that you're sorry about being unreasonably unforgiving these past few weeks, you ever act like that again, we're getting a divorce.
I'm so sorry. So we didn't get divorced in the end, but then for some reason, Rick's attitude started to get more arrogant and condescending. Maybe he started to think that because I apologized and told him I didn't want a divorce, I was now at his beck and call. Rick, who had been so kind to me, had a complete lapse in personality and turned into a totally different person.
The hell is this sludge? I'm in the mood for Japanese curry today.
I've already made the meal, Rick, so why don't you just eat this delicious hamburger steak I made you?
Who the hell settles for hamburger steaks when they want Japanese curry? I don't need this.
So, in a nutshell, he became extremely picky and selfish when it came to the meals I prepared for him. Additionally, since we both work our own jobs, we used to contribute the same amount of money to the same bank account for living expenses, but he stopped contributing his share after a while. I asked him why, and his response was,
We're not getting a divorce, right? Then why do I have to pay a living expense?
Needless to say, it was incomprehensible logic, if it was logic at all. He must have taken advantage of the fact that I gave him the cold shoulder, and emphasized his grudge against that by becoming more aggressive and condescending. I was a little annoyed with him, but then I told myself to consider this. Which was a bigger problem in our marriage, infidelity or the inability to have children? When I consulted the scales on which was the bigger issue for us as a couple, my infertility obviously had to be the bigger problem, no matter how I twisted my ways of thinking. Therefore, I had no choice but to listen to Rick. One day, while I was living such a life with Rick, I received a call from Mom. I answered the phone and heard that Dad had collapsed and had to be rushed into the hospital. Seeing the expression of dawning panic over the phone, Rick approached me. He must have heard Mom's voice over the phone because he said that he would come to the hospital with me. When we arrived at the hospital, I found Dad asleep in his bed. Mom told me that he had suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed on the right side of his body, and that he would need to be cared for from then on. My parents gave birth to me at a more advanced age, after 40, and Mom herself was now over the age of 70. It would be very difficult for her to take care of my father by herself, and she evidently asked me if I could help her. When she did, I began to wonder what I should do. If I had to take care of Dad, I would have had to live in my parents' house to take care of him. It's not far from where we live now, so it's not impossible, but I was worried that I would neglect the housework at home. And what with Rick's new personality founded upon arrogance and egotism, I knew he would not like that and make my life more miserable than it already was. I found myself thinking about it hard and never responded to Mom's request.
Of course she can help, Mr. Mulligan. I can also help out when I'm not working. We could even live together if you think that's what's best for Mr. Mulligan. I'd be more than happy to live with you if you'd like.
I was so surprised because I never thought Rick would say such a thing. Dad was going to be hospitalized for a couple of days and Mom was going to stay with him for the time being. So Rick and I went home. On the way home, I asked Rick why he said what he said, and his response was unlike anything I'd ever heard, in the best of ways.
Well, you know how sad your mother seemed when your father collapsed? I thought it'd be nice to have that kind of relationship ourselves. One founded on love and trust for each other. I want to have that kind of relationship with you too. I'm really sorry that I've been so cold to you these last few weeks, honey. We can't have kids, so we have to support each other, right?
That's what he said, and I nearly teared up. I was so happy that he saw my parents and how their relationship was and changed his mind about how to behave around the house with me. We then sold our house and moved in with my parents. Mom had become Dad's caregiver, and they were very happy to know that I was coming home again. Then Rick took the initiative to help Mom and I take care of Dad. Whenever Dad had to go to the hospital, he drove me to the hospital and carried my father on his back when there was a step in front of him, or some other obstacle. I was a little shocked because of the sudden change in Rick's attitude, but more than that, I was just so damn thrilled that he cared so much for my parents. One day, Mom called me while I was at work to tell me that Dad had gone to the hospital and was not home yet. Rick was supposed to be taking him to the hospital, but when I called him, he didn't answer the phone. I rushed to his hospital and found him sitting in his wheelchair in the waiting room. He was looking around the room anxiously, as though he was beginning to get worried about how long he was staying there. I rushed to his side, and he looked relieved once he saw my face.
Thank God you came, Hillary. My boy Rick suddenly just had to disappear for some time, but before he went somewhere, he told me not to tell anyone, so I couldn't call your mother or anyone else for that matter.
Oh, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize Rick abandoned you. Dad shook his head when I said that.
Oh, it's fine, sweetie. I don't think Rick abandoned me. He had a phone call and he suddenly had a very anxious look on his face. He just told me he had to run to do a quick errand. He'd be back soon. He seemed genuinely shook about something. I could only assume something terrible happened, but it's been 2 hours since the doctor's appointment and he still hasn't come back. I hope the poor boy's doing okay. Let's talk about it when we go home, okay? I'm also in the mood for some ice cream.
I put him in a cab and we were dropped off at a convenience store near our house. An hour later, I get a call from Rick.
Hillary, your father's disappeared.
I picked him up from the hospital and now he's at home, Rick. What were you doing, for crying out loud?
My job contacted me about some trouble that happened. After a bunch of phone calls, time passed by like a bullet. They told me it was a simple job that would take no more than 20 minutes, but 20 minutes, my sweet frickin' patootie. I only just got off. 3 hours later. Had to get to my job, and I asked her father to wait for me a little while, but it ended up taking much too late.
Rick was desperately trying to hide something by making all these excuses. I couldn't tell because I couldn't see his face, but something about his tone of voice told my gut he was grinding his teeth together. The very same sign he displayed whenever he was lying. I distrusted his desperate excuses from the head-go. And another thing, I was concerned about what Dad had said to me. He'd mentioned Rick had told him, and I quote, "Don't tell anyone." That must have meant that he didn't want it to be known that he had left my father behind. I couldn't entrust Dad to such an irresponsible person any longer, so I decided that I would take Dad to and from the hospital myself. Nothing serious happened on that particular occasion, but once I considered the possibility that Rick's suspicious behavior persisted and something more serious happened to Dad as a result of it, for his safety and for assurance for my worried self, shouldering the burden myself was the best option. Remember the period of time when Rick suddenly started working overtime more often and not being home on his days off? He had been helping me take care of Dad, but once he started working late more often once again, he stopped taking care of him altogether. Then one day, Dad collapsed once again. He was admitted to the hospital and was told to be bedridden for the foreseeable future. According to the doctors, every day was quite a mountain to surmount. So I took some time off work to be ready for anything, alongside Mom. Rick, however, hardly came home since Dad was hospitalized. He used to come home after his overtime work, but nowadays he doesn't walk in through the front door anymore. When I asked him what was wrong, he always answered me with 4 words. "Work's making me busy." And his attitude towards me was slowly returning to the way it used to be. Cold, arrogant, and unpleasant overall. Then, 2 weeks after Dad was hospitalized, he passed away. He did his best in spite of all the pain he was going through, and because of this, Mom and I felt more of a feeling of gratitude and of relief. That he was finally at peace than sadness. After the funeral was over the week after, Rick called me over to him, saying he wanted to talk to me about something.
I have something to tell you.
What is it?
I want a divorce.
Yep, once again, out of the blue, my husband confronted me with divorce documents.
I can finally divorce you. I'll get half of that juicy estate you're going to inherit, all right? I suggest you start thinking about all the arrangements. You didn't tell me this, but your father is a very wealthy man, ain't he? He was a skilled investor. And in the wake of his passing, he left behind quite a handsome estate, didn't he?
He was right. Dad was a very wealthy man, and his total assets were said to be over $100 million. When I asked him how he knew that, since he never told a soul that Dad was as wealthy as he was, he said he heard me talking about it with Mom. 1 month before my father collapsed the first time, Rick and I were at my parents' house. My mother had cooked too big a meal and wanted us to come over and take the leftovers off her hands. When I went to the kitchen to help her, she asked me some advice about Dad's inheritance. She didn't seem to know how to manage my father's estate, which was seemingly way too huge for her to manage alone. She had seen the news on TV about disputes over inheritance, and that made her pretty anxious. I think Rick must have been listening to us when we were discussing it.
If I'm still married to you, I get some of the inheritance through division of property, don't I? That's why I put up with it all. I took care of your hopeless father, with the intention that if I actively participated in his care, he might give me all the money, instead of just a sliver of it.
He was actually laughing as he said that.
So give me half of what you got, then we'll get a divorce.
What are you talking about, honey? We're already divorced. When I told him this truth, Rick's triumphant look instantly vanished and was replaced with a pale expression of panic. His mouth gaped open in surprise, and the look of astonishment was the most hilarious highlight of the day. So here's the truth. I had hired a detective agency to investigate Rick's behavior at the same time I became suspicious of his behavior for the second time. He already had a history of cheating on me, and the signs were all too obvious. Getting home late, cold and condescending attitude towards me, and complete negligence of Dad, whom he was caring for so attentively up until his frequent hours overtime started up again. I naturally suspected he was cheating on me again. It seems that a woman's intuition is oftentimes right during times like these. When he had cheated on me before, he had stopped coming home from work and disappeared on holidays. So there was no doubt in my mind that he was doing the exact same thing this time. And she must have been pretty important to Rick, because he was willing to abandon Dad alone and confused for hours on end if it meant he could see this woman during that time. I told him that as I served him with photocopies of the divorce documents. I simultaneously showed him the photographic evidence I got from the detective agency. I had already filed the divorce papers a week before Dad passed away, Rick.
It's not right to file for divorce when the intentions are not mutual.
But you just said you wanted a divorce, and lest we forget, you've already confronted me with divorce documents when we hit a bump in our relationship. Your space was completely filled out, and you never confiscated it. So it was still valid should I submit them to City Hall. And they were, by the way.
I mean, I guess, but...
You put yourself into this mess because the kind, sincere feelings you had for me, Mom, and Dad in your heart weren't genuine. Greed and ill intentions always give away clues to expose you. And in this case, my suspicions were justified. I'll make sure I get my alimony for your affair. I told him that and left his presence. After that, my divorce with Rick was finalized, and through a lawyer, I was able to get him to pay me alimony. Rick was planning to live lavishly with his girlfriend with his share of Dad's inheritance, no doubt, because he actually bought a luxury tower condo and was even planning a year-long overseas trip. But now that his father-in-law's inheritance was no longer within his grasp, he couldn't afford to pay for the condo and decided to sell it. However, the problem with the condo's location was quite substantial, as it's not near a train station, nor was there much public transportation. Because of these factors, the price of the condo dropped dramatically. And not only is it much cheaper than when he bought it, he can't seem to sell it and get a large sum of money. And the trip overseas was canceled. It cost a lot of money to cancel the trip because all this happened just before the trip. Rick ended up having to borrow money to pay for both the alimony and the trip cancellation fees. I also demanded alimony from his girlfriend, but the bitch made Rick pay the alimony for her and ran off with another guy. Rick got no inheritance and no debt reduction, and even his girlfriend abandoned him penniless and pathetic. I don't understand how he thought he could get the upper hand after not one, but 2 betrayals. Since then, Mom and I have been living together. We sold all of Dad's real estate, sold the family home, and moved into a nice condo with her. Now I spend my time faithfully with Mom, traveling, and I'm working hard at my job and enjoying my new hobbies of wood carving and racquetball. Sometimes Mom and I look at photographs of Dad in the family album, and in the future, I hope to meet someone who will embrace me with such pure and generous love as Dad did to Mom. Even now, I can sometimes feel his warm hands on my shoulders, and I can see his smile in Mom's, hopefully proud that I've become the woman he wanted me to be.